I don't know what my wife is. I'm not sure why, in light of all that has transpired, I've decided to make this public. Perhaps the guilt has tilted the scales in my consciousness, or perhaps I have finally grown a backbone. I thought I was doing something good, or at least the lesser of two evils. These days, I simply don't know. What you're about to read will sound like I'm bashing my wife for having a different perspective. All of these short excerpts will make me appear insane, and the retelling of this event will be disjointed, but I guarantee you that there is a method to my madness. What I sow for you here will sprout into what my wife has become. I'm sorry if anyone reading this is connected to or is a victim. Nevertheless, you don't want my apology, you want to know why. The why is right here. Our wedding night began with a question. A question that seemed so out of place in the brilliance of our joyous celebration that I initially mistook it for a joke. I couldn't resist chuckling a little. She didn't laugh, not even a smirk. Her expression was as blank as a mannequin. She was clearly dead serious. Something appeared to change in the air around her. The stranger danger alert, which most of us had imprinted in our brains as soon as we were old enough to talk and walk, sounded like a tiny siren in my head. As if the woman I dated for 5 years and joyfully married, as if the woman I laid in bed with and gazed fondly at is a stranger. I shoved the worry to the back of my mind since, at the time, it didn't make sense. Sophia? A stranger? Perhaps I did have too much champagne. She simply repeated the question, can you sleep out on the third Sunday of the month? I was instantly sobered up by the tone shift. Thinking about how strange such a request was, I straightened up in bed. Did she even realize how complicated the question she was posing was? She graduated at the top of her Purdue class, so of course she did. There's no doubting that she misunderstood because she didn't, which is why it bothered me. The question is as simple as a sunny day. A question to her question flashed into my head, why? That question never left my mind. Instead, I said, of course, honey. She got out of bed, slipping her silk robe over her pale, freckled figure, and stepping into the slippers that were waiting for her on the plush carpet of our hotel suite. She must have believed I was still playing tricks on her. She steps into the dim candlelight at the center of the room. She tucked in her dark, midnight hair, which appeared to absorb the little light that was present. The ethereal beauty she possessed was only found in fairy tales, yet here she was, living as my wife. I need you to promise, she asserted. We had date nights every night, we were glued to one another when we weren't working, and we hadn't had any arguments or conflicts during our first month of marriage. For heaven's sake, we were completing each other's sentences. Lord pardon me, but the sex was, and still is, fantastic. We nearly had no problems. Nearly. It was early evening on June 16th, Father's Day, and admittedly the third Sunday of the month. We'd just gotten back from dinner with my parents. It was an incredible day, and I had never seen my wife smile so widely. Everything changed when we came home. A voice yelled, "What are you doing?" from behind me just as I had dropped my keys on the counter. I was a little startled because I didn't recognize the voice at first. It was firm and somewhat loud. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw my wife standing in the shadowy archway leading to our living room. Her face was buried by her long, dark hair, leaving only a menacing black-clad figure in front of me. Even the yellow sundress she was wearing didn't appear as dazzling in the shadows. A single, sharp gray eye emerged from among her hair. "Geez babe, turn on a light or two," I said with a hesitant laugh as I approached the wall switch beside her. Her gaze followed me as I moved, like a predator stalking its victim. The living area filled with light, transforming the dark figure back into my adoring wife. I noted her hair was now parted and tucked behind her ears, unlike how I had seen it in the dark. I attributed it to fatigue and the trick of the light. I gave her a cheek kiss. Her skin is surprisingly cold for the middle of June. She did not move a single muscle. She didn't laugh at my joke or react to me kissing her. She did react when I switched on the light, though. I'm not sure what kind of reaction it was, but it most definitely wasn't the reaction of someone who's lived their entire life understanding what happens when a light switch is flipped. I didn't have anything planned, I said, answering her original question. Probably just an early night. I didn't think it would take this long to forget about your promise, she breathes. I'm stopped in my tracks by that. Promise? What promise? Then I recalled. That night, I did promise, didn't I? Oh yeah, the whole sleeping out thing. I kind of did forget, I'm sorry. Is it possible to start it next month? Her blank expression returned. That expressionless visage resembling that of a mannequin came on her face, shocking me back to the night we had that awkward chat. It left me feeling cold and bewildered, and I never forgot it. Despite her blank expression, I knew the answer to my question was no. Look, why do I even have to go? A question I ought to have asked on the night of my wedding. Get out, she snarls. What? Get the fuck out, she snaps. Now. The only time I've heard my wife yell was in court during her prosecution cases, and even then, it was a firm, authoritative voice rather than a yell. Of course, she raised her voice, but it was nothing in comparison to the volume she now achieved. Her voice was heavy with anger as she screamed at me like a banshee. Again and again, the same demand flew from her lips. Get out. I couldn't help but back away, but she approached with the ferocity of a king cobra. Fearing that our neighbors would overhear and call the cops, I raised my hands in surrender, grabbed my keys from the counter, and dashed out of the home. Looking back, the best thing that could have happened in this whole situation would have been our neighbors contacting the police, that is, if they hadn't already been in our basement. I spent the night in my car at a 24-hour Walmart parking lot. I couldn't sleep after the argument. What happened to the wonderful day we just had? I couldn't get the scene out of my head. Sophia was trembling with scorn, and her typically clouded gray eyes become a space gray with each syllable she threw at me. My wife wasn't like that. Whoever just chased me out of the house was not my wife. After spending so much time with my wife, I eventually realized one of the clear signs that she is lying to you. It comes very naturally to her as a lawyer. It's simply one of her many talents, therefore I don't blame her for it. We were okay as long as she didn't tell me lies. As you may be wondering, well, if she lies seemingly all the time, then how do you know she's not lying to you? I get how it sounds. Her head tilt is the response to that. I can tell she's lying every time she tilts her head. The majority of people will not even notice that she is moving her head at all because it is a brief and insignificant movement. It was amusing to watch her make up little white lies to the cashier about not knowing the coupon's expiration date or to her parents about being busy on the day they wanted to go out to dinner. Occasionally, she would tell small, innocuous lies, and each time, her head tilt would be a prelude to that lie. It appeared to me that I was the only one who knew about it. She had somehow managed to keep it from her parents, friends, and work associates. I witnessed her lie in court, and things stopped being so innocent and innocuous. A man's life was really on the line. If he lost this defense, he would face the death penalty. A piece of surprise evidence. The idea of an admissible piece of evidence that wasn't mentioned during discovery was laughed at by the defense attorney. The judge permitted it because of its relevance to the case. Even as a bailiff, I realized that was a very lucky and risky move based on the judge's mood. When did you come across this evidence? And why didn't you bring it up sooner? The prosecution was cautiously asked by the judge. She was not about to make things too easy for Sophia. A tiny smile appeared on my lips. Sophia thrives in situations where she is backed into a corner. Her escape from this was something I wanted to witness. Her head shifted slightly to the right. The smile faded from my lips, and I blinked to ensure I was seeing things correctly. Her head is cocked to the right, and she is smiling while gazing at the judge with those storm gray eyes. I was called into forensics last night at about 9 o'clock. The lead crime scene investigator had returned from vacation earlier in the day and went right back to work. I'm not sure how he performed this miracle, but I suppose it only required a second pair of knowledgeable eyes. I'm positive it was a head tilt, but what precisely was she lying about, considering she even had the lead CSI testify that her claims were accurate? That left-field home run made the case clear-cut. The jury found the defendant guilty and sentenced him to death by lethal injection. I was unsure of how, but after witnessing her deceive the judge, I knew deep down that the man was innocent. The quarrel we had later at home was similar to the one we had several months before when she kicked me out of our house for the first time, except that I was the one who started the dispute this time. What the hell was that? I asked fiercely, and rightfully so. She turns to face me as we enter our kitchen area, sliding her coat off her shoulders. You never seen a battle like that in court before, have you? She gives a wink and smiles. The defense didn't know what hit them. Well, when you tell a bold-faced lie to the judge, I wouldn't know what to do either. The temperature dropped like a rock, and I wasn't imagining it. It dropped so dramatically that my gaze shifted to the thermostat on the wall. Why in the world does this place seem like a freezer when the temperature reads 70? Then I noticed the frigid air was coming from my wife. She was standing there, staring at me with narrowed eyes in her wine-colored office suit. Sincerely, I prefer seeing that irate look to the blank one she gives me on the third Sunday of each month. I swallowed my uneasiness and began again. I know what I saw. As she approached me carefully, her darker eyes staring down at me while she ran her fingertips along the counter. And what exactly do you believe you saw, bailiff? My title came out of her mouth like spoiled food. She was luring me in. Her intention was to push me into a corner. She wanted to find out what was going through my head so she could manipulate it and turn it against me. She'll rip it to pieces the moment I show her my hand, just as she did with innumerable other defenses. Seriously? You're going to use your courtroom tactics against me? I'm not some lawyer for you to crush, I'm your goddamned husband. I snapped. Fine, if you want to pretend that an innocent man will not be killed as a result of the shit you did today, go ahead, but don't bring this lawyer nonsense into our house. She sneered at me as if I were simply the gum on the bottom of her shoe, and it was cold and unappreciated. Innocent? You don't know the first thing about innocence. As far as I'm concerned, you're all guilty. She walked away, and we did not speak for the rest of the evening. I slept on the couch, not because she forced me, but because I couldn't bear lying in the same bed as whatever was causing the bitter cold emitting from her body. It was definitely not my wife. We went through our first cold shoulder phase a few weeks following our dispute about her lying in court. Our home was normally a hive of laughing and happiness from the two residents. All that was left of a healthy home was its corpse. It was always so cold and it always came from her, regardless of how high I set the thermostat. We hardly spoke, at least not about important things. Given that I worked in the same courtroom as her, we would discuss work. There was only the sound of forks and knives hitting our plates, no jokes or laughter. She occasionally came home and went right to bed without even eating dinner. Or she would sit with the door closed in her office for hours. I've always been curious about her activities there. Given the tapping I heard coming from inside, I'd presumed she was typing away on her computer. If we slept in the same bed, one of us would sneak in at a later time to avoid uncomfortable conversations. She said one evening that she was at her breaking point. She claimed that work had been taxing her and that she needed a vacation, but I assumed she was referring to me. I expected that vacation to include me, but it did not. She took a girls' trip to Miami. I can guarantee you that I was thinking the same thing you were by this point. I believed our marriage was over, and I was prepared to get a late-night text about her being rubbed off by a stranger she met at the club. When I think about it, I wish it had happened so I could get a divorce and keep my sanity. The vacation lasted a week, and I was meant to meet her at the airport, but I slept in too late since I was so exhausted from working doubles. I awoke to a dark room and, realizing I had slept through my alarm, fumbled for my phone. Her plane touched down 2 hours ago, fuck. I saw dozens of angry, understandably irate texts from her, as well as a few missed calls. How on earth could I fall asleep and forget to pick up my own wife? Although I had hoped that this time away might help, it appears that we are already off to a rough start. Just as I was ready to get out of bed, there was a knock on the door. My heart fell to my stomach. Once more, the knock was louder. It didn't sound like ordinary house noises. I gingerly stepped out of bed, letting my foot gently contact the carpet so as not to disturb the wooden flooring beneath. I reached inside the drawer on my bedside and squeezed my hand around the pistol grip of my firearm. Logic assured me my wife was at home, but my instinct told me something else was there. Not the front door, but the door to my bedroom, was knocking. So, if she made it home but lost her keys, knocking on the front door is appropriate. But who the hell knocks on a bedroom door? I managed to reach the door and pressed my ear against it, listening for any breathing or movement. Nothing. Total and absolute quiet. Then, out of the silence, there was a knock again, which made my ear twitch from the door's strong vibration. I quickly retreat away from the door. I listen once more for any movement. Nothing. The breath I've been holding comes out of my lips in a plume of smoke. I really need to have the heat checked. Who's there? I cracked. I'm not sure what I anticipated. Why would a robber reveal his identity? I begged, deep inside, that it was just a thief trying to make a fast score. That's something I could comprehend. Instead of a voice, I heard the skitter of feet behind the door. It sounded like many people or, I'm not sure why my thoughts went there, something with several legs moving around. Fuck this, I mutter under my breath as I grip the doorknob. It took me a lifetime and then some to summon the bravery to turn the knob. The creak of the mechanics shifting into position to allow the door to open sends shivers down my spine. If I heard that, then whoever is in here with me did too. The corridor was deserted as I opened the door. At least I assumed it was empty, but it was actually quite dark. Anything could be hiding beneath the cloak of shadows. The bitterly cold hallway ripped through my sweatpants and sweater. I didn't dare to enter the hall. A light switch was mounted on the wall a few feet away, but it required me to step through my bedroom's doorway and into the unknown. That meant leaving the familiar protection of my bedroom. By the time my argument with myself was over, my eyes had adapted to the darkness. I peer into the nothingness, which has unfurled its veil to reveal its secrets to me. Someone was standing in the hall. Sophia. I quivered. I had just said my wife's name, so one would think that I believed that to be her. So, why did the hold on my gun get tighter? Because my head was attempting to find sense in this absurdity, that this was my wife who had just returned home from the airport, but my instincts kept me anchored to the bedroom floor. The figure started turning around at a sluggish, mind-numbing pace. Baby. I'm sorry. Before I could say another word, I slammed the door. My heart is racing out of my chest as if I had just run a marathon. That was not my wife. It had far too many legs to be my wife. And why did her face elongate like that? I had so many questions rushing through my mind, but they were cut short by whatever was in the hallway hammering on the door again. The knocking didn't stop this time, turning into a relentless banging that threatened to knock down the stupid door. I took a step back and raised my handgun to chest level at the doorway. Something was pounding their body into the door, attempting to break it down. A thin, lengthy crack emerges in the door, and more threatens to grow as a result of the constant banging. Get the fuck out. More banging. Another crack. I'm warning you. The knocks were coming from everywhere now. My closet door. My window. Even the walls. Stop it. I cry out, flipping the safety switch on my handgun. I won't ask again, damn it. Bang 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 bang. My finger begins to apply pressure to the trigger. I felt a hand on my shoulder and was about to spin around and shoot whatever was behind me, but a voice interrupted my hysteria. "Jack." My body froze, but Sophia pulled me in so I could see her face. My wife was there, and she had a frightened look on her face. Her dark brow wrinkled, and her gray eyes expressed sympathy. "Jack. Baby, what's going on?" She lowers the hand that gripped my gun. "Put the gun away." I flipped the safety switch and looked into her eyes, trying to determine whether this was reality or not. It couldn't have been a dream. That all seemed so real. However, my wife embraced me with such intensity that I couldn't help but think it was all a dream. "Sophia?" It wasn't a question per se, but rather my way of telling myself that she was indeed there and that I wasn't some insane monster who had nearly shot my own wife. Head tilt. Ever so slightly. "Yeah, it's me, baby," she assures, pulling me toward the bed. "Come back to bed." I couldn't help but notice the spiderweb of cracks in the door as I lay down to sleep. The number of missing persons in my hometown is almost twice as high as the national average. Here, people disappear as if it were an Olympic sport. For comparison, my town has 20,000 residents, give or take, and there were 28 missing residents last year alone. It might not seem like much at first, but in the 5 years prior to that, there were 91 missing persons. Nearly 1% of the population has vanished. That does not include the persons who went missing and were found, or those whose skeletons were discovered instead. That would raise our percentage to almost 3%. The highest number of missing persons we have ever had in a single year is 66. To be fair, that occurred during the founding year of our town, which was previously a mining town, therefore local historians attribute that number to a mine collapse. Even though I'm not very interested in history, particularly as it relates to my town, I can assure you that no mine collapse has ever been mentioned in our history books. The point is that my neighbors recently raised the missing person status to 31 in October. When exactly they vanished is a mystery to me. They were an old couple who didn't go out often. The husband was bedridden, and I believe he had a home care aide. No family or friends ever paid them a visit. I can't picture being that alone during your most vulnerable time in life. The landscaper's visits to cut the lawn were the only activity I observed at their residence. I'm not sure exactly when they vanished, it might have been a week or months ago. This is essentially what I told the investigators that questioned me and my wife. It was a firm belief of the detectives that the couple departed during the final 2 weeks of September. Which I found unusual because they can't just get up and leave, especially without their vehicle. The wife uses a walker, and I'm not even sure if the guy can walk. They weren't getting anyplace very quickly. The stranger thing is that the healthcare worker also vanished. 3 individuals simply disappeared. One of the beat cops suggested the woods, but was soon silenced by the higher-ranking officers. All the terrifying stories in the area come from the woods. Something in the woods is blamed for all the missing persons. Of course, no one has ever seen this enigmatic creature. Following last year's occurrence, I started believing these accounts. A woman was discovered chained and gagged in the woods, with these strange brands on various portions of her body. The fate of the man she was discovered with was much more gruesome. Only half of him was discovered nearby. I'm not talking about a cut across the middle. Think of his entire body as a complete Kit Kat, and then think of it as just the kit. A clean cut, something even a log cutter couldn't perform to a human body. The remaining half of his body was never located. She was unable to speak when the police tried to persuade her to testify about what had transpired. The woman's vocal cords had been replaced with hay, yes, the stuff horses eat, according to a medical assessment. Regardless, the woman didn't last a week. She was spotted hanging from a tree branch not far from her initial location. Her escape from the round-the-clock guard rotation is a mystery. According to the autopsy, one half of her body was swapped out for the other half of the dead man that the police initially discovered. According to the testimony of the physician who performed her initial and follow-up examinations, the woman showed no indications of having any alien attachments prior to her recent discovery. Anyone shouting gibberish about creatures in the woods never really caught my attention. It would be nice if we could accept that not all evildoers are demons. I have no explanation for the disappearances or the things that occurred in the woods last year, but I am positive it isn't a murderous clown. On the other hand, my wife will listen to all of this nonsense. It didn't matter if you were a homeless person or a child, if you had something to say about missing persons or the woods, she would listen closely. I was not being totally truthful when I informed the police that I knew nothing about my neighbor's disappearance. However, sharing this narrative would make me appear insane then, especially in front of my wife. My sanity is my last line of defense against her. If I lose it, it's game over. Read this and you'll understand. We were doing our weekly grocery run, something we do every weekend. Weekends were one request we made of our work. As a prosecutor, Sophia isn't always assured of that. Working in a courthouse gave me the benefit of always having Saturdays and Sundays. We are fortunate to have this weekend to spend time together. After her vacation to Miami, our relationship took off, and we immediately returned to savoring every moment together. I quickly wheeled the cart around the supermarket, looking for my wife. If we were to go home and cook dinner in time for our show, Jersey Shore, we'd have to leave right away. That woman can teleport, I swear. It's amazing how she can vanish from view the moment she's out of your line of sight. At last, I located her by the deli area, hunched over at the waist, conversing with a young blonde female. I rolled my eyes at the story she told my wife. Something about an imposing faceless woman with hair similar to my wife's enticing her into the woods. I'm not sure why my wife entertained this nonsense. For someone who only deals in facts, she really enjoys her superstition. As the young girl recounted what I assumed was some sort of nightmare, my wife remained motionless. She didn't even appear to be breathing. Her expression, which was blank and mannequin-like, is what tensed me up. "Are you who I saw in the woods?" the girl whispers from behind her hands. "Maybe," my wife grins. "What's going to happen to me if I go into the woods?" "The same thing that'll happen to Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Our neighbors." "What happened to them?" My wife arose to her full stature. "We can show you," she finishes with a smile. "We won't be doing anything because we are not in the business of scaring pretty little girls like yourself," I interject, ruffling the girl's hair. I shoot my wife a look, but she was still staring blankly at the girl. "Run off to mama now." I grin and wave at the girl, who rushes into the arms of her equally blonde mother. I turn back to my wife, my expression displaying annoyance. "Let's leave the scare tactics for the defense, prosecutor," I beseeched. We hurried home from the grocery shop and prepared dinner in time to watch the last of Jersey Shore. Even yet, the show and dinner weren't as relaxed as they usually were. Even though my lovely wife was cuddled up in my arms, my thoughts were elsewhere. The seemingly innocuous reference to our neighbors. Why did she talk to that child in such a serious manner? I did not notice a single head tilt. Whatever. Given that it was the third Sunday of the month, I had the entire day tomorrow to think about it. I'll be out hiking with a handful of friends upstate. If she wants to have the entire house to herself, I don't care. In the end, the protagonist discovered that his wife was not what he thought. There were deep secrets surrounding her life, and her mysterious actions began to reveal a terrifying truth. But the most important question that echoed in his mind, is she still human? Or is she something else? What happened inside this house is not just an ordinary horror story. It's an invitation to think about what might be hiding behind the faces we know so well. Perhaps the protagonist was a victim of something bigger than he could comprehend, or maybe he is part of a dangerous game whose rules he hasn't understood yet. Some people disappear without a trace, and some questions remain unanswered. But the truth may be more frightening than we imagine. Will these secrets remain buried forever? Or is there more that must be uncovered? The music resonates softly with the channel's logo appearing. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this terrifying story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more epic and thrilling tales. Join our community to always stay updated with the latest. Until we meet again, remember, things are not always as they seem.